Well, hello, hello. We're back for another Other Ink Thursday, and this time I'm joined by Brian Colin of Creature Creation, right? Did I say that right? You're the president of Creature Creation?
Curation. It's a weird word
Curation.
that isn't really in the dictionary, so it's easy to stumble over. Yeah.
And also sculptor, game designer, famous for you got some famous names to your games to your name, games to your name, famous
I
games
don't,
to your
I
name.
mean, in small circles, maybe.
Well, you have a big poster at Gen Con every year, so like people
Yes.
see the names of your games.
Yes.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to my interview. And
Thank you
yeah,
for having
we're
me.
we're going to talk about your origins into the game design, like kind of what's led you to use so much pink in your marketing,
Yes.
and I think there's some. Was it? It's Sqwürmish is a thing that's going
Yes.
to come out, so we're going to talk about that
Very
too.
soon.
So we're going to talk about all that. So tell me, Brian. I don't know how to, because I always like to hear because you could tell me about like your origins as a gamer if you
Sure.
feel like that's relevant to the story, right? Like, oh yeah,
I
Big
mean,
Brother
we've all
showed
been
it.
playing RPGs forever, right? I mean,
Sure, I mean that is usually the answer.
yeah.
But what I find sort of sometimes more interesting to ask people is like, okay, so you've been playing games, but
How
when
did you
did you
get into this?
decide to make stuff for
Sure.
games?
Yeah.
Like, and not like if you because you're such a model-y miniatures guy, I've been looking at your stuff for Squirmish that you're making all this terrain and like giant pink crystal shards and stuff like that, and like it looks all great, but like
Well, thanks.
that's a hobby that I never got into is that
And that's very new
miniatures
to me,
making.
too.
Okay, so because that's what I was going to say, if you were like, oh yeah, I was a wargamer from way back, and like I used
Yeah.
to make all my terrain, and so like it's just always been part of what I'm doing. But like, anyway, so like, yeah, what is the time? How did you go from like being a gamer to like
Sure.
being like a publisher, writer, designer? And I think I heard part of the story in a different interview with you, but yeah, for my audience, tell us how that
Sure.
happened.
Well, so like I've always made stuff. I've
Hmm.
always wanted to make my own things, my own versions of things. So like if you go way back, like in the Wayback Machine, in like 2004, I self-published a sci-fi Western comic that I painted in watercolor. Um, Let me tell you, people did not want that. People only wanted superheroes or scantily clad women in comics. So like, and there wasn't digital printing like there is today. You had to do traditional offset printing with like minimums of 1,000 of each issue. So after 4 issues of the 6 series, I was like, all right, I can't make anything because I'd get an order from Diamond for like 100 copies of the book, and then
Yeah.
I'd have 900 in my basement. Um, and my wife and I could have bought a house much sooner had I not spent like 12 grand on printing these 4 books. But it was a dream. But
Do you still
that's
have copies of this comic? Because I very much like sci-fi Western stuff. Like,
I
what
only
is what is this comic and where can it be gotten now?
you could probably search for it, but it was called Jonas Tales of an Iron Star. It was like a pseudo-religious like gunslinger Western thing, like weird evil demon type things. And yeah,
I like all of those words, so
yeah.
I'm gonna search it up and see if anybody's selling it for,
Couple dollars.
aftermarket for $1 each.
Yes. But so like I got my first experiences with conventions doing that, being on the other
Hmm.
side of the table
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. But the process of making comic books is so long when you're writing and illustrating and all that stuff that I then kind of moved into customizing toys. At the time, like designer vinyl was pretty big with like graffiti artists, tattoo artists, graphic designers, and I was a graphic designer for my day job. So I
All right.
started sculpting on top of little like 3 inch toys and 8 inch toys until I started getting into art shows and things like that with it, where one of the other designer toy people turned me on to this material called Magic Sculpt, which is a 2-part epoxy that you can sculpt with. And then my stuff started looking more and more realistic. Like my creatures were started looking interesting, and they sent me a thick book, like a phone book size thick catalog from the taxidermy shop because that's where I had to order this magic sculpt from because you couldn't get it on like Amazon or anywhere else at the time. And so then I saw like these weird glass fish eyes and things that looked very alien and different. So I started ordering those, and putting those into my sculptures, and then they really started to look real.
Sure. And just so like this is where is something like you're talking about the vinyl toy boom, like where
Yes,
is this relative to like the just ridiculous prevalence of like the Funko Pop thing?
that
Like
was
this
way
is
before Funko Pop because this was like Kid Robot, and their big Dunny craze. So that would have been 2007-ish, 2009 maybe,
yeah.
like right around there.
So,
Um,
so this is like tell us a little bit, tell me at least a little bit more about this world because the toy side, the vinyl stuff. I mean, I'm intellectually aware that like there are super collectors and like I just at this past Gen Con, somebody I know bought like some sort of like it must have been like some original Transformers playset or something like that. It was this
uh-huh.
huge thing that he was carrying around. He's like, I finally found one for, and I'm like, okay, I guess, but like,
It's awesome.
well, yeah, I mean, it was a cool playset that he found and he'd been looking for it or whatever. And but like there's a whole world what I'm saying is I know there's a whole world of that, but I don't know almost nothing about it. So like, do you have I mean, again, like Todd McFarlane toys and like,
Sure.
realistic sculpts of like movie characters and stuff like that is a thing. So like when you're talking about going to the shows like that, is that you're just table after table after table of like you got the Alien, you got the Terminator, you got the, the knockoff Predator, you've got like, or was it more, is it like Beholders and Rust Beasts and, you know,
Right.
is it a natural transition from one side of the aisle to the other, or what was it like to be in that environment? What kind of your competition was up against,
So it was weird because as that was coming up, so was like the Atlanta Comic Convention or Atlanta Toy and Comics, and it merged with Dragon Con
Yeah.
at the time. So it was odd. So there was like comic book artists. Then they ended up bringing in a lot of vinyl toy designer people, like and also like pop surrealist artists, like Greg Simpkins. Also, like his street name is Crayola. He came in and he like did a collab. He did a painting that Stan Lee signed at the time, and it was a bunch of like it was a really weird mashup of lots of different cultures. And you could see that on the designer toys too, from the different styles and designs. Um, so I mean, it definitely didn't fit with like the McFarlane super realistic stuff. This is more like graphic design and like if you did a search for like Dunnies or Monies or like with a UNNY or even some of the earlier Super 7 toys. Um, like some of shoot, yeah, I've got some off to the side, but like some of their earlier like vinyl toys before these were the early blind box toys, like before there were blind boxes everywhere,
Yeah.
and like that my kids had bought a bunch of and things like that and pushed me to make blind box toys later. But that that was like part of going into a store and seeing them and being like, wow, you don't know what's inside. These are cool designs. Like being a graphic designer, it's like, wow, somebody really has an eye for this. It's cool what they're making. Let's see what I get. And I like the package design. Everything about it like kind of pulled me in. Uh,
Yeah, the package design.
so, but
I,
then
I
that transitioned from making like toys to making more life-size monsters to me,
yeah.
because from the small toys, as my stuff got more realistic, I saw the big styrofoam busts in the taxidermy catalogs, and I ordered a styrofoam deer mount, and I sculpted on that.
Right. Like you just need more canvas to so to
Right.
speak, right? To like if you're going to incorporate like glass eyes, like that doesn't fit on like an 18-inch tall. You can't put very many of those on an 18-inch tall like
Right.
base, I guess.
Plus the impact of like walking into a space and seeing something that would be like, oh my gosh, I just like stepped through a portal into a fantasy setting, and
Hmm.
there's this big weird creature. Because all the
Yeah.
things that I was sculpting were things out of my imagination. They were certainly influenced by playing D&D and all the RPG stuff, but early on, like going to uh, Dragon Con and in the comic section used to be downstairs in one room, and in the next room was the fine art section. And like David Lee Pancake, who makes a bunch of dragons, he was doing dragon style taxidermy, and I was doing weird, crazy stuff out of my head. We had a lot of similar processes, but the what they were very, very different.
So speaking about process, like is this or these one-off? pieces, or this like you would make these sculpts in clay and then cover them in like the plaster of Paris strips to make a mold that then you could put in your resin and make, seven of them, or not, 70,
Right.
100 of them, and then sell. And then you have to paint the cast, but then you're able to, you only have to do that. I mean, it's obviously a lot more work, but you can do it. Everybody can buy that weird tentacle monster, every show you've
Right.
got one for sale because you made a cast of it. Which way were you working?
Almost all of mine were one-offs, except for a couple of small ones. I did like, I think one of the very first Make 100s on Kickstarter, I did a
Hmm.
little like what I called a goblin head. And almost all of mine also were like mounted on wooden plaques that I hand cut out and made so that they were like ornate shapes and
Yeah.
looked like taxidermy. I also did a couple of smaller things like a tentacle hook that people could put in their wall to hang like a hand towel or a light jacket on. Little things like that where I made silicone molds and cast those out of resin, but I didn't love the production side of it. I
Mhm.
enjoyed the creative side of
Yeah, it
making
was
something new and weird.
it was more
And
an
also
art.
then creating the story that went with it. Because when I then got into Gen Con in the artist alley in 2016, that's where everything clicked. That's where like,
Mm.
oh, hang on, I've got my monsters. I've got stuff kind of written about them because I've always homebrewed my RPG stuff.
Yeah.
And then I was like, wait, there's all these other nerds like me out here and they all love playing games. Okay, now I need to make this into a campaign setting and a bestiary and that sort of thing.
So were you writing like little blurbs to put like on the next to the plaque, almost like an art
Yes.
description about like, this beast is from this hellscape and it was slain in these star dates, and I mean, was it that sort of
Yes.
thing
It was usually like a
originally?
paragraph, like usually either about the species or the individual character that that one was.
Right. So then it's just like either redrawing from the sculpt, or like you do some photography and then like slap that all together into the monster manual, and like it it's so fascinating the different ways that the routes that can go. So that was your first sort of like in 2016, you were in the artist alley, and then you're like, okay, well, this is what I want to do next, is like make the manual to put stats with all of these things, or you
It would
already
be
had
great.
the stats or whatever.
So I jumped one step. I did an art book first that
Hmm.
was like photos of them and then lore. And then there was a like 5e PDF that you could get with it with stats.
Yeah.
And then as that, like I did a Kickstarter for that, I started making little enamel pins and smaller things that people could buy at my booth that weren't one of a kind, $1,200 sculptures. You know, as I continued to grow the things that I needed
Right.
to make the booth be able to pay for itself. Um,
Exactly.
then I made friends with the guy Kerry Drake, who's local, and Isaac Skaggs, who's local as well. And because I'm not a mechanic person, I
Hmm.
don't like that's kind of why I like rules light RPGs now. Is like I want to have to do less of the crunch and more of the rest of it. Um, but I teamed up with them. I really liked Carrie's illustrative style because I don't feel like I'm a strong illustrator. And I liked Isaac's writing style. And so they helped create like all the illustrations in the 5e book and the bestiary were by Carrie. And then Isaac did a huge chunk of the writing. And then I did a lot of the narrative stuff along with it, but he did a lot of that as well. Um, and did a Kickstarter for that and fulfilled it right before the pandemic hit.
Yeah. All right. That's well, glad you got it out before that, because we had yeah, we had stuff to fulfill that happened. We had to fulfill it during the pandemic, and that
Yes.
it just makes it harder.
Yeah, absolutely.
s-
And it
uh,
makes it hard to get people excited about playing it when they can't get together and you can't, you know, bring new people into it at that time.
yeah, yeah. It does. There's a whole world of what could have been. I guess.
Right.
Um, the so what was that? So like, you've got Vast Grimm on your hat,
Yes.
and that is the big I don't know,
Gift.
it's like Tremors in space, kind of like always these teeth maws coming up out of asteroids or whatever when I walk past your booth. And
Yes.
so is that what this original is? Has that been the like sort of, that's the thing, is this sort of space monsters thing, or what was that original project? Has it always been the
So the original project was called World of Revelo, which is Revelo is my son's middle name, Oliver backwards. First conceptualizing it when my wife was pregnant with him, and so that's more high fantasy, almost like you don't play as humans. You're all playing these weird creature species that are, highly influenced by like Jim Henson and things like that. Everything's
Mm,
just kind of um, more bizarre, and then there's different factions trying to take over and things like that. But the Vast Grimm shift happened after I played Mörk Borg for the first time
mm.
a little over 4 years ago, and wanted to sculpt something darker than my more whimsical sculptures.
Yeah, there's definitely I mean, obviously all the pink and black and highlights of not yellow. You do more blue highlights, but
Mhm.
that splattery aesthetic is it's so hot right now, or has been for the last
Yes.
few years. So it makes
Yep.
sense that you're in that Morkborg is the inspiration, right? That for that look anyway, that is the aesthetic of the moment, it seems.
Yes.
So you mentioned I mean, we were kind of just going from step by step
Yeah.
through your whole history or whatever, but like you mentioned that like you like the indie the lighter RPGs now. What I mean, you what kind of stuff had you when you said you brought in this these partners to help you make the book, and it originally just had some 5e stats or whatever. When was the what kind of pieces were you pulling together to make it the first time you did like this is an RPG first, as opposed to it's an art book with an art with some extra stats,
Sure.
like was that the Vast Grimm then after you saw Morkborg, or what other was there another?
I mean, yes and no, because I mean, for before there was Vast Grimm, I sculpted one piece, and I was like, oh, now we need to do a sci-fi version of this game because of the piece that was sculpted. So
Yeah,
it all plays off of each other. And
yeah,
like actually, even before I did the 5e for World of Revelo, I was homebrewing that and playing it in Fate because I was enjoying that. I had been running Fate for a number of years, playing a different bunch of different settings that I would homebrew. Um,
I like
but
the Fate system a lot, so that makes
yeah.
sense. It is that lighter. It's got a lot
Hmm.
of those. It's one of those early lighter games. It's obviously several years old now, and there's other more popular sort of uh, styles now, but I think it's sort of one of the earliest to try to be a rules light RPG.
Yes. And I think one of the things that I missed the most when playing that was rolling the funny shaped dice.
Hmm.
Because everything was just the
The
six
fudge
sided
dice.
plus or minus. I
Yeah.
wanted those, like I wanted that nostalgia of all the other shapes of the polyhedrals.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, for when the Vast Grimm stuff started, it was just because my friend Ross had run Morkborg for my Atlanta friends, and I got the book after playing. I'd used the PDF, and then I ordered the book, and cracking that open and being a graphic designer, and all of a sudden things being in my brain being like, wow, it doesn't have to be column after column after column after column, and that's when I immediately like reached out to Ross and asked if he'd want to co-create something like that. And it
So,
was the sorry, go ahead.
well, you go ahead. You're the guest. You're telling the story.
And it was the first full hack of Morkborg at the
Hmm.
time. Like I did this, and then Luke was like, "Well, if Brian can do a sci-fi hack, well then let's do a pirate hack." And like so, there had been a lot of third-party things released, but nothing where it was its own self-contained RPG within the whole book.
Yeah. I mean, that's cool. And I was going to ask you what the other sort of like sci-fi games are in your sort of constellation of inspirations, right? If that it's, I assume there are some. I assume you're not just reacting to, oh, but what if it was, Fate but in space or whatever. It's there's got to be some other games that you played that you came up on that you liked a whole lot.
I think one of the main reactionary things was I was so tired of doing fantasy, like
Hmm.
because I had been doing fantasy so much, and I wanted something that kind of leaned more into like, I mean, out of all the toys I played with as a kid, I played with my Star Wars toys and my Lego toys the most. And when the Lego toys, most of those were like the space ones. So those are the things that were like, okay, yes, that's why I need to go in this direction. Just because I want to run stuff that's different than fantasy at the moment.
Yeah.
I played a couple of Starfinder games. I'd never played Traveler. Uh, and so like I hadn't played a ton of sci-fi RPGs, and this is really less science and way more fantasy than hard science.
It's
It's
just fantasy set in space.
yeah. I mean, it's gross and weird and got futuristic technology and things like that, but it's definitely no hard sci-fi.
Yeah, so tell us then a little bit about like what are some of those things? What's actually in the first would you call it the first complete hack of Mörk Borg to exist is not a supplement for Mörk Borg, but like what all is in there? Is it I assume because I haven't actually picked up and looked at the whole
Sure.
thing, so it's like I assume it's random roll tables for monsters. Here's some alien environments, the basic core set of rules. Sci-fi usually has a lot of cool gear. So like, is it
Yeah.
what all's in the book?
It's really like almost all of it is setting the tone and the vibe for the game itself. Like between the art layouts and everything, it's got lore and like about the setting and how most of humanity's been infected by these six different strains of parasitic worms. How that once you've been infected by the worm, you become like if you're overcome, you get turned into the Grimm and alien hive mind zombie-like species. So it's got a lot of rules for that and how like if you have a worm like how you roll each day to see if it's working with you or against you. Um, it's got uh, the eight different core classes that are in it and how everybody's pretty miserable. It's got a starter adventure in the back, monsters. It's got pharmaceuticals because everybody is trying to have some sort of escapism in a universe that's coming to an end.
Yeah.
Because there is the ticking clock element, just like in Mörk Borg, where you roll to see if a torment has occurred, and once seven have occurred, the universe is over and humanity's lost. Um,
So it really is like a hack of Mörk Borg. It's not just using the rule set to do some or a similar aesthetic to do something different. It is the similar sort of spiral
yes,
down into darkness sort of thing.
although there is a glimmer of hope in it because there's this gate of infinite stars that people are building. So there's a chance to help find the pieces, put it together, and get out of the universe before it collapses. But what if somebody on your crew is infected, and
Yeah.
then you go and destroy another universe?
Yeah. Uh I mean, all of that sounds very, like you said, it's very much a vibe. It's very much a vibe. And that's the vibe that you get when you walk past the booth. And so I guess I kind of want to hear some more about like, I guess what you've done over the last few years as far as like expanding from that into, you know, you know, because you have like lots of products in your booth and
Yes,
there are no big like mounted heads that I remember ever seeing when I walk
right.
past your booth. So it seems like the books. And so like when I heard that you had come into this from the sculpting, I was surprised because like you're very far now from like being in the juried art show section of Gen
Yes,
Con.
yeah,
You're very much in this sort of like I'm an RPG publisher. Here's my stuff, that I'm doing. It's books, it's supplements for books. It's I think you've added zines this year as like, and they're not even like they're just like you're like almost reselling. Is that right? Is that you've got like a section of zines or like I think these are cool and I want people to be able to have them. So like here they are,
yeah. So
you
most
know.
of that is actually people in the industry that can't make it out to certain shows. Some folks in like Poland or Germany or Sweden or wherever, or some other folks in the US. And because those are almost all Mörk Borg based, it's easy to be like, hey, if you like Mörk Borg, you might like Vast Grimm, or if you
Yeah,
like Vast Grimm, you might like these books. So it's
yeah,
just like a lot of those people were carried by another publisher before they went and had a big upset in the industry, and so I would just kind of became like a place where they could have their stuff at some of
yeah,
the shows that I go to,
yeah,
just to
and
help friends out.
sure, and like you said, it makes sense to if you're doing your booth becomes a center for like the sort of the Borg
Right.
greater community, Yeah, yeah, you mentioned Luke. I assume you mean Luke Stratton of
Oh yes, yeah,
Limithron.
yeah.
Pirate Borg also very has made a big splash in the industry, and they're
He's made a
you know.
massive splash. He's yeah.
But yeah, yeah, that's sort of a pun. I didn't even mean it for it to be a pun, but like, it's you've got these sort of like, Stockholm Cartel isn't at every show, but like
Right.
there are these other places where like people are doing the similar thing that the people can get their Mörk Borg from. And Tony Vicinda, he's got
Yep.
like a whole stack of zines over there
Totally.
at his booth and stuff like that. So um, I don't know, like how do you feel as like a creator and a publisher that like kind of I mean, hopefully you feel good about where you are currently, but like it is so different from like I'm an artist, I'm making these sculptures, and that's my time into them, and then now you're like I have books, I have to print, you're managing an inventory, you're
Oh, I love it all.
building relationships with people internationally to house their stuff as it,
Right.
like it's so different from where you began, but is it just, oh, I love new challenges or like
Well,
or is it just it's the natural evolution? You don't ever want to get bored. Like tell us how you feel about it. I don't know.
I think it's like one, it seems like the natural path to go on because I am a control freak. Like I
Mm,
want to know where my stuff is all the time. I want to know like so that's part of it. I mean, I'm still sculpting because I'm photographing the sculptures and putting those into layouts that I do. So it's not as much. I also like realized that the material that I use I need to sculpt outside because it totally wrecked my sinuses. And I was sculpting and breathing it in as it would cure while I would then sit and work on the computer. And that was a mess. So now like in the cold months, I don't sculpt as much because I have to go out on my porch or into my shed and plug in a little heater and try and sculpt in the cold. But so I'm still doing all of that. But I also I love the book side of it. I like doing layout. I like being able to juggle different forms of problem solving
mm,
so that I never get fully bored. Kind of like the past two projects I've had where there were book expansions, I worked on three different books at the same time so that I could jump from one to another and back and forth so that if I ever got stuck, I could always go to something else. Now, they were all like 48-page books, so they weren't like massive undertakings, but they were all little segments so that like all you really need is the core book. But you know what? I wanted to expand on this part of the world, or I wanted to add space combat, or I wanted to the things that I want to explore that you don't need to play the game
yeah,
but you can if you want to.
right. And were each of those kind of laid out in a different style to kind of keep each project fresh, or were they sort of like they all have to fit within the remit of the core book, so they're all sort of in a similar way? Is it just what made it different to be able to switch between them, I guess?
I guess the writing and things like that, that was what was different. And like some, like one is space pirates. So it introduces factions, classes, and an adventure in the a hex crawl adventure in the back. One is just location based, adding lore on like the some of the villains or like mob bosses of like this one area and things like that. Some one's an ever shifting dungeon crawl. So like keeping things slightly different
Yeah.
so that just so I can keep entertained as I go.
Do you have like is it like is there like writer Brian that like writes a manuscript and then like artist Brian who goes and illustrates some of that stuff and then like layout Brian that like is like why did you guys give me this trash? Now I have to figure out how to fit it all on the page. Or
No,
is it
because
sort of like happening all at once? So you
yeah,
writing into layout and
yes,
taking a
and
pause
it's a
and going
terrible
to produce
process.
illustration.
Yeah, and for anybody else, the process would be horrible. Like I write, and then I plug it into layout, and then I tweak it, and then I copy that and put it back in the Google Doc, and then I send it to Walt to edit it, and then once it's edited, then I copy and I paste it back into layout. So I do the layout process twice, but it kind of helps me kind of visualize what I need
Yeah.
because I'm not good with word count. Like it's really like based on what I need for the area for the pages to make sure the spread works well,
Yeah.
that
So
sort of
you're
thing.
doing stuff like where you like, oh, I need to take out 100 words here on this page so that it like doesn't go
Right.
on to the next page because that would mess up the layout, you know?
Right, exactly. But you know, since I'm so used to like, I mean, I've been doing graphic design since I'm old, and I only went to
Hmm.
a 2 year art school, so I've been doing like print design since like '97. So most of that I can just kind of click, 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 and do without thinking too much about it.
Yeah, it's definitely a skill. It's great to be able to do that. I mean, every once in a while, I I'm always like amazed because I am definitely I have not trained myself up in very many other skills of in the RPG stuff. So like I'm always like the people who are like, oh yeah, I do it all and I write and illustrate and I do my own layout and I'm like I, you great because it's so different from like I'm very much a words person and
Right.
I have t art I have an artistic taste and I can
Mhm.
commission art and I do art direction, but then it's definitely like in someone else's hands to like get it right, and then I'm not a layout person either. So then it's like, back and forth with the layout person and like I'll make notes in a manuscript about like, hey, put it here kind of like this. And then sometimes perfect, you did it right on the first try. And other times it's like, well, that wasn't really what I asked for, but
Right.
like,
Well,
it
that's another
is.
completely different skill set as well. I'm not a good art director. I'm also like I'm not a good manager of people. Like when I had a design studio, like doing graphic design and had employees and stuff like that, I'm just not. I'm like, here, go and sink or swim and hope they work. And I'm not good at giving direction on
Mm,
things like that. So, I mean, that's definitely a skill to be able to make sure it comes back the way you want it to.
sure. It's still, I guess it's one of those grass is always greener things though,
Sure.
where it's like I see people that do it all themselves and I'm like, oh man, if only I had would make time in I take like 6 months or and I learn how to do a graphic design program and then I could do it all myself but then of course then you would have to take the time to lay it out too. It's like I can send it
Yep.
off to layout and then I can work on something else. It's different
Right.
different ways of working on things. Um so I don't know what we want to I didn't write down a bunch of questions for this,
Sure.
so I don't really have enough question. We want to talk about um, Sqwürmish and like kind of what's coming up for what you've got
Sure.
going on, but I feel like I don't know if there's a transition, but there's more that you want to say about like kind of what your project has been so far, what your,
Oh, yeah. And I totally currently like I just got in yesterday prototypes for Plunderlust, which is a card game set in the Vast Grimm universe that we did 7 different card decks. That's a an expandable card game, so I've got to look through all of that over the next week or two,
yeah,
make sure that all the proofs are right, make sure there isn't anything missing, make sure I didn't do any weird typos or something got messed up. So uh, and that card game, the cards themselves, they have stats and things on them that can be used in the RPG or in the card game. And so that's currently at the printer waiting for my final approval and for
yeah,
me to be like, okay, these are the quantities we need for everything.
yeah. So what kind of card, tell us about the card game then, because that's like a new area of design for you, I guess. So
That's
it's get,
very new. And I'm not like a card game player either. So Duncan Hall, who wrote it, he wrote a Mörk Borg card game. And he had written some stuff for a game jam for Vast Grimm that I had created. So I went to his like itch page and I saw that and I was like, oh, I'll buy the print and play version. And I printed it out and played it with my kids and my wife. And we all really enjoyed it. It's got similar to RPG mechanics. You roll d20s to try and attack and things like that. So it has the same similar mechanic to the RPG side. So it's like, you know what? He's got an open license. I could do a Vast Grimm version. And then I was like, wait, why not reach out to him? He's not like he only had things on itch so far. Nothing's actually published. We could split the profit and he could actually, he could be published and I could help, bring somebody else into the fold, which is always a good thing if you can help bring other people into the other side of the hobby.
yeah.
And especially if they have initiative and drive to do things. And as soon as I asked and he was thoroughly interested, he already knew the stuff because he already had the books. So like when I said I wanted to make a card deck for each of the factions in my Space Raider book, he started listing out all the characters that were already in the book, how to expand on those. So you play as a crew of space pirates. You're a character, but so are the ones that you're able to buy. You can buy space raiders or you can buy mercs that can either be bad guys or on your team, and you're exploring locations, finding loot, and trying to defeat a boss monster before your health meter runs out. Essentially, you can play solo or you can play against somebody else.
So is it like I mean I could imagine several different ways that this goes, but like is it like almost like a deck building kind of element where you're like exploring places to draw cards from decks so that you could put them in your deck so that then when they come out you can use them in the to
Yes,
explore
to
more
to a degree.
places and is it what's the Yeah. What's the
You
gameplay like?
you have a deck of 60 cards. There's always a certain number of boss monsters. There's always only one of each character, because they're specific people. Then there can be up to four of a bunch of different things, including items, locations, monsters, that sort of thing. So you start with a hand of seven, and you have a life meter of seven, and you play locations to explore. Each location has a die on it from like a D4 to a D12. You roll that, multiply it by 10, and that's how many credits worth of monsters are in that location that you're exploring. And also, once you're done exploring, that's how many credits you can spend to add things to your play area, items, new people for your crew, that sort of thing.
Okay. So it feels like vaguely similar to something like the Pathfinder adventure card game, but not quite. So it feels like it's combining a lot of different things.
Yeah,
I'll have to go. We'll have you tell us all your links at the end of the interview, and that like people could go check that out. But
awesome.
um, definitely an interesting implementation.
And that's part of like now, like with the RPG, the card game, and then the skirmish game. I kind of
Right.
see myself building three pillars in
I
my
mean,
universe of,
that's
that I can keep building on and keep making stuff for.
right. Those are basically the three pillars. So yeah, you've got it on the way. So then tell us about that. Like, is that sort of like your transition, setting up your own transition to like talk about the Sqwürmish, which is a skirmish worm, it's spelled
Right.
funny, like it's set in the same universe
Yep.
with where everything is infected with worms, so like space worms. And I having heard you talk about how like all of this started from like you making, epoxy sculpts and stuff like that. It's almost like coming back around to where you started from in some respects, I guess, to make a miniatures game. But it is obviously very different from the one-off sculpts, that you're doing
Yes.
if you're making like boxes of miniatures and like I mean, I don't even know if it's boxes of miniatures. What is it?
Sure.
What tell us
So,
all about it.
well, and so honestly, I'm not doing the miniature sculpting,
Mm.
like because I always did physical sculpting to get away from the computer and have like a tactile experience. Whereas these are all being sculpted in ZBrush by Malevolent Minis, who also did minis for Neon Lords of the Toxic Wasteland and has a game called Roller Brawl that they're working on that has. I met Saul in at Granite State Comic Con, the one that Doug organizes the gaming section of in New Hampshire this past year, because Brian Shutter
Neat,
was
neat, neat.
my next door neighbor, and he had Roller Brawl, and then Saul came and it was there, and then I saw him again at Gamehole Con, and then after Gamehole Con, I was like, well, do you have any time? Because I was already working on Sqwürmish, but it was just going to be a book, right? It was just going to be a miniatures agnostic hardcover book. It would fit in with all my other books. It's the same size and format and
Inviting
page
people to
font
kit
size.
bash some like space marines
Right.
infected
Yeah.
with worms or whatever.
Because there is a game called Forbidden Psalm, which is a miniatures agnostic Mörk Borg game. So this is based off of their rules. Just like I did a hack of Mörk Borg, I'm
Yeah.
doing a hack of Forbidden Psalm because I like their rules. But and also because so my son had gotten into skirmish games just a couple of years ago. And we started playing one that he had played at a local convention. Then he's recently gotten into Marvel Crisis Protocol. And I had the
That's a
Forbidden
deep well,
Psalm
I hear.
I had the Forbidden Psalm books on my shelf, and I was like, "Well, we should play these because I have them and I haven't played them, and I like how that has more of the RPG mechanics in it, and like because it has the same basic mechanics as the Morkborg books.
Hmm.
If you know how to play that, you know how to play this, but you have five people instead of one. You're not playing make believe as much as you are doing kind of tactical stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but the game itself has like it's the same setting, but it has 13 scenarios where you can play solo. Each scenario has an objective where I'm trying to go and find this key card by looting these enemies that I need to kill first, or I need to do this or that. They're all slightly different, interconnected in 3 episode arcs that have a longer format story that you can play solo, co-op versus so that if you want to like I know
Mm.
a lot of people like sometimes certain people in my family it's easier to play co-op and some people want to play versus so making it able to do both is good but the miniatures themselves are based off of what's in the core Vast Grimm book. So we have an 8-pack, one for each class of a character class pack. Then we have an 8-pack of monsters or creatures or threats, and then we'll unlock another 8-pack of classes that'll be variants, like another 8-pack of monsters, then unlock like a Grimm Horde and a Raider pack. So there's hopefully there'll be like 60 plus miniatures once it's all done.
That's ambitious. But yeah, but I like the way it's structured. Like miniatures crowdfundings can be so astronomical, right? I mean, they
Right.
can be very successful, but like structuring it that way with like we're going to start with eight and then add eight at a time and that's a good sounds like a good plan. As somebody who hasn't organized one of these before, that sounds like a good idea.
Well, and so Malevolent Minis is actually going to 3D print them. We'll offer them as 3D prints or as STL files. Because looking at manufacturing, just the molds themselves, wanting to do so many different ones was easily going to be at least like 30 grand.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'd like to pay some bills.
Yeah.
Like I'd like to pay my mortgage, and if we don't have that overhead and we can just print what we need, do a universal package that still looks good, but I can print like however many 1,000 or 2,000 of just the package and put them in individually for the individual 8-packs is I think the way to go.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely sounds, I mean, like I said, it sounds good. It sounds like you've thought about like a lot about how to design the scalability, right?
Yes.
Is because I talked to somebody in one of these interviews not too long ago about like and they jumped in with making miniatures in manufacturing inkjet, not inkjet, injection molding. Like they just
Yep.
jumped in like they'd never done any game stuff before, and they were like, I want to make injection molded miniatures, and they did. I mean, they
And they were
exist.
broke,
They could buy the models, but
right?
but definitely there's like the conversation was about like I've learned what I've learned by doing it wrong a bunch of times.
Right.
So
Yeah.
this is definitely a scalable plan that you've put in place that kind of like it sounds good. So tell us a little bit. So what all like is there's still going to be like a rule book, I assume, like that'll give you the stats and stuff like that. What all is on the crowdfunding campaign? Because this is and tell us more about when it launches and all that kind of stuff.
It
Like,
launches February 11th at 11 a.m. Eastern time.
all right, so it'll be live by the time this by people are watching this video.
Awesome. And by now it'll be funded. I'll be rolling around
Yeah.
in like piles of money. Like, yeah, there'll be live cams everywhere. It'll be fantastic.
You'll be asking yourself why you didn't plan to do it, like now that you've made $5 million,
Great.
you'll be talking about making the injection molded versions of all of these,
Exactly. Um,
uh,
so there's digital versions of everything.
right.
Um, so there's like the PDF of the book, there's STL files. You can do add-ons like per pack. There's the core book. There's then there's all-in pledges. Like there's an all-in digital and an all-in physical. The physical one also includes a 5-pack of Turbo Dork paints that I picked out because I wanted the colors that fit what I do, and I'm friends with the Turbo Dork folks after doing conventions and stuff. So we're calling it, we're going to do on the packaging, it's going to be a mashup. It's going to be Grimdork
Mm.
between the two. And that'll have an exclusive variant figure in that pack as well. It's going to be one of the other figures in a slightly different pose with the rebreather is off and different weapons. Um, and then a lot of the stretch goals are going to be digital stretch goals like uh, adventures by other friends, things. One of the stretch goals is going to be a jumping mechanic or a jumper mechanic because in stuff that hasn't been published yet in the Vast Grimm stuff is where kind of like sliders jumping into a parallel universe or
Okay, that
different
kind of
world or
jumper,
something like that.
not the I'm thinking of like the stormtrooper mobile suits,
Gotcha. Yeah.
stormtrooper like they do a lot of like rocket assisted jumping
Yep.
in that in the book anyway. So not
Totally.
like that. So more like
No.
sliders.
Yeah, so more like, okay, friend, you want to write some scenarios, and they can jump into your universe for X number of rounds, and then they get pulled back in to their universe, so it can play in different genres with the characters, but also knowing like they're going to have blasters and pulse rifles and things like that.
Interesting. That definitely is a new way to spin on it, for sure. Like, what does the worm-infected sci-fi soldiers look like when they show up in like your gritty crime noir world?
Right. Yeah,
Uh,
and that also then will hopefully introduce my audience to their stuff if they're not already familiar with it.
hmm. So you have specific like partnerships where you're looking for like, it's not just going to be like a generic, fantasy world. It's going to be some other writer's specific fantasy world. Like,
Right.
okay, that's a
At
cool
least so
idea.
far with the three that I've lined up at this point. I don't can't imagine it'll go beyond what I've already got kind of baked in for stretch goals. If it does, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well, if you need to have anybody show up in World War One, I
yes,
know
they will
somebody who's
never go
published a
home.
game about that, so you could
Excellent.
put me on your list.
Okay.
The um, because I think there's a people talk to us all the people come a small number of people like come to us, a medium-sized number of people come to us and they're like, Charlie's art would look so good as miniatures, and I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
sure it would, but like that's a whole other business that
Right.
like we don't do. um
Not yet, but like
well, it's
I
true.
listened to your year end review,
Yeah.
right? For 2024, and it sounds like you're going more into board games. So I mean, going more into board games, then you're already moving more into that direction
That's
anyway.
true.
So
That's true. It's true. I mean, the board games is yeah. I mean, the I think one of the games that we've talked about having little standees, and you're already like one step away from, just going and heading printing miniatures or whatever. Even if you're only doing like six in a box for a board game, that's still making miniatures.
right,
So
absolutely.
yeah. We are trying to pace ourselves in our branching out into board games and stuff like that. Like the two we've done so far are cards only, cards and tokens only. And then the one that
And
we
paper
have,
products are definitely much more manageable when it comes to budgeting.
sure. And we've done decks of cards and stuff like that. So like cards is like we understand cards, or feel we do. And then like we've got a plan for a board game, and they're not even any boards. Like the two board game, they're card games in a
Right.
box. They don't even have boards. But like definitely when we get to later this year in 2025, we're going to be doing a more proper board game that will have a board that will have pieces you're placing on the board, and so it'll be sort of one more step in that direction, and like we'll see how it goes, because it's
Awesome.
it's it's learning. We're trying to not jump in and make, I don't know, one of those big box games, like one of the Madigo games that has like one of my favorite board games is Giants by Madigo Games, and it's got like tiny little figures and like all these tokens and like actual little wooden logs and hex pieces you put on a map, and like it's got a lot of stuff in the box, a lot of
Uh-huh.
stuff in the box. And as somebody who mostly just makes books, I'm like, I don't know how to make any of this stuff,
Yep.
so it's intimidating. But you don't seem to be struck by that but I guess also like you're kind of like you've done it all before in a lot of ways. Like, like the idea of making physical 3D objects
Mhm.
is something you're more familiar with. So you don't seem
It
to
is.
be, does that, am I thinking about it wrong,
No,
or,
no. And like I also had prior to this life, like I did a lot of graphic design for a wide range of clients, from
mhm.
small mom and pop companies to large corporations, including like things that might go into like a fast food or fast casual restaurant for signage and pop-up display signage, things that you had to think about the engineering of items that all go together.
Yeah,
So like, yeah, it's all to me, it's all just puzzles, right?
right.
All just kind of figuring out how things go together.
When you were talking a little bit ago about making the packaging, like how can I make the packaging one package, get one printing of one package that I can put whatever miniatures in. It's like that's what you were just talking about that design skill, about like where does the logo go, and how does the I'm sure there'll be like a plastic window or whatever, all that kind of stuff that you
And
have.
yeah, and of like so the here's a bad prototype of it because it's not right yet. Like so this should be a bigger window. It should have a
Hmm.
die cut where the logo is going to be, right? But then on the back there would be like character pack one images like the back of a GI Joe card, monster pack one pack, and so that I can check when they get put
Mm,
it when me and my kids fill it up, and then it's a different put a different sticker barcode on the bottom. So it's like, okay, it's this barcode if it's character pack one, it's this barcode if it's monster pack one. So yeah, but it's also this is the same height and width as the book. So if you put this on a shelf
yeah, yeah, yeah.
together, it looks good on a shelf. Or if you turn
That's
it this way, then you'd be
you
able to
got it.
see the miniatures too.
Yeah. I mean, that's eh, all of that is good decisions. It sounds like, matching up the to have that sort of display because there's such a that's again sort of an element of the industry that like I am not personally very involved in or invested in. I mean, I behind you and you could see my this is just my
Yep.
room and I got like crud up here on top of my cabinet or whatever, but like your background, you have like books and display shelves and art on your walls and you're very much into that visual sort of stuff and a lot of people in the industry are that you know, they're buying, figurines of the skeleton from the cover of Mörk Borg. I mean,
Right.
there's somebody making that, and because
Yep.
there are people who want it, and the I'm much less of a collector of that sort of stuff. I
Sure.
have some art that's sort of come to me through gifts and stuff like that, but I am not a collector of that kind of stuff. But knowing that the people are like, yeah, you're taking and it seems to be you yourself. You like that idea of like, oh, this package is also a display item in and of itself is sort of knowledge and experience that I don't have that doesn't come as naturally, right, to me
Right.
personally because of just I'm not that kind of a collector.
But then
Um,
also like thinking of things being the same height and like looking at it on a shelf together, you want like a customer, somebody that's bought one of
hmm,
your books to be walking down the, oh, that's familiar. Why is that familiar but different? And be
right.
like, oh, it belongs with the rest of my collection, you know?
Yeah, it belongs to the rest of my collection. Um, So related to that, I have like one kind of final question for you that
Sure.
and you talked before about kind of like establishing your pillars, right? So you've got an RPG book and you've got a card game of a similar same story world, works on the similar sort of principles, but it's card game format. And now you're working on a skirmish game, which I love. I didn't say this before, but I love the idea that it's also scenarios, right? That it's not just a rule set of like smashing each other. It's sort of like there are
Yes.
specific objectives and stuff like that to go on, and it tells a story, though it is a skirmish game.
Yeah.
That
The idea of just fighting, I get so tired with that.
right.
Playing that style. If I've done it once, I'm like, yeah, okay, I've done that. You
Right.
know?
It's for great justice, right? Our
Right.
we will defeat you. Our cause is better. Let's
Right.
fight on the tabletop.
Yeah.
Lots of games have that, but it's like Descent is a board game. Descent Journeys in the Dark,
Yeah.
that board game, especially the second edition, has like these very specific plot lines and like you
Yeah.
go on the missions and the maps are like this. And so you talking about it being that way, but anyway, that's the three pillars, right? Like
Right.
tabletop, all the three pillars of tabletop, right?
Right. Yes.
So here's the question that I have for you is like what either is that becomes then the foundation and you build like yet more vast grim stuff on top of those three pillars, or what is I mean, why not? Or is it like, okay, so we've covered all three of our bases in the like space sci-fi horror worm apocalypse world. Next has to be we're doing rabbits and cute flowers and like it's a political
Right.
thriller but it's like set in the woodlands and like is it more of the same in the future built on top of the pillars or is it like what's the next sort of story world to introduce and start doing the three versions of I don't know.
For me, at least for now, because I want like the the people in the industry that stick around are the
Hmm.
ones that don't give up. I think
Yeah,
this it's the same thing with the IPs. Like I'm still getting new people that are just now getting into the RPG side. So I want to keep releasing stuff that's going to keep whetting their appetite because unlike what I grew up with, where I homebrewed everything, there's a lot of people that that's not for them.
yeah,
So I want to, and plus I've got so many different ideas and things I want to explore. Like I can keep making stuff for a long time and keep going and still feel satisfied with what I'm making and enjoy the process. So I'd like to keep doing that for as long as I can. You know, if I get a wild hair to do something different, it will most likely be an offshoot, but not something that I dedicate so much of my direction towards.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's just the I'm sure you've met them at cons, the guys who make that Eschaton game. Like they've
Oh
got
yeah,
like
yeah,
two things and they keep selling the same two things and they've got a giant stack of them at every con and
they do
people keep
great.
buying it. People keep
Yep.
buying it. So like
Yep.
why deviate from their what they've got
Right.
already? Uh
But I'll keep making new stuff for
yeah.
this, you know.
Yeah, new ways to tell a similar story or new corners,
Yep.
because
It's a big universe out there.
if you wanted to make a political thriller, you could just set it in the same world, and it's the political thriller of who's making the decisions to throw these poor worm-infected soldiers at the monsters,
Right?
like, um, yeah, there's a lot of room to explore there
Yes.
still. Uh, all right. Well, Brian, we talked for almost an hour, I think, and not quite, not quite, but there's a little bit more time. So tell us
Yeah.
about where people can find you on the internet and any other sort of like final things that you've got going on.
The easiest place to find all of my things is briancolin.com. That's BrianColin.com. That's kind of like my Linktree style page that has all the links on it. I'm most active socially in the Grimm Place Discord, because I'm just not really great at being communicative elsewhere. I tend to blast stuff and promote stuff other places, but I'm not actually really good at
Yeah, yeah.
interacting with folks in other places. I'd much rather do something like this where we chat and get to know each other better, this way. But yeah, Sqwürmish is hopefully going to take up a fair amount of my time, and at least for the next month or two or three, and then I'll be around doing a lot of conventions this year,
Yeah, I was going to ask
probably
you that
more than
too.
I'd like.
Yeah. So what does your convention schedule look like, at least for the first part of the year?
Let's see. So we've got Gamma in February,
Hmm.
MomoCon in May, Origins in June. Then I'd have to look at my list. My brain's starting to, I'm guessing I'll see you at Gamma.
I'll be at Gamma. I'll be at
And
Gamma and Origins,
Origins, yes.
and not at Momo.
That's in
That's
my
a,
backyard, and
yeah.
I get to
Well,
be a guest. So
and you mentioned Dragon Con earlier. You used to have a
yes,
presence at Dragon Con. That's
I'm. I used to have a booth at Dragon Con. Like as my everything's kind of changed and grown over time. Like when I
Mhm.
had the Revelo stuff that was high fantasy and big sculptures, my booth didn't have a cohesive presence. The last time I had a booth in the vendor hall at Dragon Con. But then last year, my friend Alan Panicle, he's in the art show, but he also has a vendor booth, and his normal booth runner was moving that weekend. So I helped like run his booth along with an assistant, and I had some of my stuff in there. And my stuff goes really well with his work. Some of his artwork's in the core book of Vast Grimm. So like it did really well. So I'm applying Saturday when the applications open up
All
to be
right.
in again. And I've been in contact with them, and they've seen my booth presence, and like I've sent videos and photos and to show like, this is what my booth looks like. I think it'll
Right.
stand out. So I should be going, hopefully we'll be going back to that again this year. But that's one that's such a big party con. Like I know the people go there and they love it. I go there, I want to be behind my booth, and then I want to go drive an hour home.
Yeah, I mean, well, I've heard that it's sort of real mixed for RPGs. Like, there's a lot of people who come and a lot of nerds in the rooms. I mean, but it's sprawling and sort of like, where's where the best place to find RPG people who are interested in the gaming side of it is harder at Dragon Con. It's what I've heard anyway. I've never even attended, so
Yeah.
um,
So I have to sell my stuff more on vibe alone and get people like sucked in
yeah,
as opposed to being in a dedicated RPG area.
yeah. Because it's not set up that way. It's just sort of like artists and game like comics artists and stuff like kind of all spread throughout the whole hotel area.
So there's America's Mart, which is like a giant building, and on one floor is primarily comic art folks, and then there's a variety of vendors on each of the different floors. So it really depends on where you're putting. Like way back when I did it, I was up in the comic artist area because they had a comic and pop art section. That's where, even though my stuff didn't really fit with that, it was kind of where it was, because that's how I came into it. But then there's also a separate building where the fine art, like the fantasy art section, is in the basement of a different hotel. And then the gaming is in a different building, like the actual role
Mm,
playing is in a completely different building. So yeah, it's sprawled over the downtown Atlanta area.
yeah, well, good luck on getting in because I know it's a
Thank
big
you.
thing, and obviously
Thank
it's
you.
good to get into your own your whatever you feel is your hometown con. That's
Right.
always nice. Yeah. Um, all right. Anything else you want to say or talk about your what I don't know. Like I said, I didn't have any questions written down, so I haven't
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think we covered most everything. I look forward to seeing you in February, especially like we've only really talked like in passing at
uh-huh.
show to show and never really had long conversations. Like I know that you were talking about shows that you're doing and trying out some smaller local
Mm.
shows. I've personally found that smaller shows that aren't geared towards gaming is really hard to make any money.
Yes. We did go to some smaller shows last year experimentally, and
Yep.
it is sort of like a calculation, right? About like if you're like trying to be, like I think Wet Ink can confidently say that we're like the biggest RPG publisher in the city of Louisville, right? So like we
Right.
should be, there's a sort of an expectation that like we should be at all of the local events, right? There's all
Mhm.
you can always find Wet Ink games because we go to all the shows, then we're there because it's our hometown, but then that's like how many weekends a year is that? And like if you're gonna sit your booth and sell like one thing because it's not because people are there to play the games, they're not there to go shopping because there's not a large vendor presence, or you know, an RPG book is always going to lose out, feels like you always lose out when you're in like a room full of like, you've got the jewelry and you've got like
Right.
fine art and you've got like, like the local gaming store is there selling like stacks and stacks and stacks of board games and they've got all
Right.
the D&D stuff down there at that booth because they're a local shop,
Right.
and like, yes, I sell role-playing games, but only these ones that I've published. It's just like
Yep.
it is difficult prospect to even if you go to a local con that has like a vendor room, it's not the same as 30,000 nerds at Origins, right? Or not
Right.
Origins, PAX Unplugged, right?
Yeah, totally.
Everybody at PAX Unplugged is there
They're
for
there for
role-playing
it.
games.
Yep.
They're there for tabletop. So
Yep.
it's sort of like why did I spend my weekend doing this? And it's like there's sort of this intangible quality about like presence
Hmm.
that is valuable, but also sort of like I don't know. It's I can never really convince myself that it's always the
Right.
right decision to go to the local shows.
Yep.
You
I
know,
get that.
I went to a show actually at the time we're recording. I went to a show last weekend.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've met Janet and Mark of Dirty
Yep.
Woods at any of the shows. So Janet and Mark, it was Janet's birthday, and she
Oh,
hosted
was it
an
her
event.
birthday gaming?
Yeah, her birthday
Awesome.
mini con. So
Awesome.
like, it's like a house full of like 25 nerds and like
Yep.
there was Mexican trained dominoes on one table and Shadow Dark at another table
Awesome.
and like plenty of food and stuff like that. And Janet was like, "Well, you got to bring your box of like Wedding Games products." So like I she was trying to get everybody to buy something from the vendor room, which was just like, a stack of my books set up on the kitchen table or
That's
the dining
awesome
room
of Janet.
table. But yeah, that was fun and experience.
Yep.
And we had a few sales like because I'm there and
Right.
we got to
And you're
play
making
Nevergo.
friends.
Yeah, exactly. And meeting people that are, they've published other things and you're like, oh, what have you published? And like, like talking about because it wasn't like it was only industry insiders, right? But it
Right.
was definitely like she invited a bunch of people who she's met at cons. So these are
Right.
like already industry people. And it had that little feel of like a little bit of an industry event in that respect, right? Because
Hmm.
the people who were there are the people who are that we know each other because we see each other at the booths every year,
Right.
So that was fun. But that's an atypical situation, I
Oh,
guess, is
absolutely. Yeah.
so yeah, finding the right balance is a mystery. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see. We have a con planned. Brandon has planned an event through a church that he is a part of, and so it's a gaming centric event.
Hmm.
There's guests that are coming in to run games for the youth, and we'll see how that goes as like again. I don't think there's going to be a vendor hall there at all, but it's
Right.
sort of
Yep.
like a very small scale local event. But that's our first foray into planning something
Impressive.
like that ourselves.
Yep.
So
Hopefully it'll
always
go
something
well.
going on. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you here in February. Well, at the time of the videos coming out, like next week.
Oh,
At the
wow.
time,
Excellent.
so we'll see you here. We'll try to get a meal together sometime
Oh,
when
sounds
you're
good.
in my neck of the woods. So thanks for being on the interview today.
Thank you
Thanks for
for
your
having
time,
me.
and we'll good luck on Sqwürmish, and we'll be sharing it when it's up there, and this video will be in support of it. So
Awesome. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
yeah, we'll see you around in the con scene.
Sounds good.